This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we're talking to author Sarah Bonner about her new release, Her Sweet Revenge. Welcome, Sarah. I'm so glad to have you on the show.
Hi, Marie. It's fantastic to join you this evening. Well, it's evening my time, I should say.
Evening your time. Here on the Pacific Coast, it's only noon, so we're only just getting our groove in the day.
Yeah, I'm very much winding down now. So
I was hoping you could start us off with some background and some insights into Her Sweet Revenge for those who haven't read it yet.
Okay, fantastic. So this is Her Sweet Revenge, which is my second psychological thriller that came out in the US last month, so a couple of weeks ago now. And it is a dual timeline story that follows Helena in 2018, who is living in the south of England with her husband in a seemingly happy marriage, marred slightly by her absolutely hideous mother-in-law. And then she starts to receive some anonymous notes that suggest that someone knows a secret that she's been trying to hide. And then the other timeline takes place in 2022, which follows Thea, who is Helena's best friend, who is now investigating Helena's murder, or what she believes is a murder, although the rest of the world thinks that Helena died in a tragic accident in 2018.
That is a wonderful overview, and there's really something that I so enjoyed. You mentioned the fact that there's two timelines that are running concurrent for us as the reader, and it's not just the two timelines, it's two points of view, two character points of view that are telling us these two stories. And it's right there in the title, so I have to dig in. The concept of revenge, I thought it was such a brilliant treatment because you're giving us the source, the precipitating action that then causes someone to seek revenge. How hard was that to do?
Fairly hard. I am not the world's greatest planner either. So there was a lot of writing and rewriting, I will be honest with this one. But it was really, really fascinating to kind of craft that narrative where you see both Helena in 2018 and you see the events that are leading up to her, what the world thinks is an accident, but her best friend thinks is murder. But then you're also seeing Thea, her best friend, investigating that. So you're kind of, that something terrible happens to Helena, but you don't know what or who through that first part of the novel. So it was very fun. Is possibly the wrong word to say, but you know what I mean. In terms of crafting that narrative, it was a lot of fun to play with that and to play with some of the less than nice characters in Helena's world, particularly, and how they may have influenced the activities of the book.
Well, your character work is exceptional. I fell in love with everyone, even the people that I love to hate. Mm-hmm. So that's when you've really hit the mark. What I also noticed about your character work when writing psychological thrillers, it's something I always put high on my list of targets I'm trying to hit. So much of it is about what's going on in each character's mind. Mm-hmm. And in the overall genre of mystery that we're living in here, there's always these clues to a puzzle that one person needs to solve, which is usually the reader who wants to solve it, and either the author leads them down the path very easily or makes it complex. You, my friend, are playing chess at a 3D level. I mean, it was absolutely amazing. And can you tell us a little about how you get into a character's head, because there are a lot of them, and in this genre you have to play with us as the reader a lot. Mm-hmm. You have to make us maybe think one thing about someone's intentions, good or bad, when there's a lot going on underneath. How do you do that?
So it's really interesting actually. So for a long time when I first started writing, I used to write in third person, past tense, I guess that kind of um, classic style. And then with my debut novel, I started randomly for no reason, like no deliberate choice, but I started writing in this very, very close first person. So almost like you're in the mind of the character and you're almost listening to their internal monologue. And I very occasionally will break the fourth wall as well. So I'll ask the kind of reader a little question because I wanted to get this sense that you were either in the character's mind or you're their best friend and they're telling you this story. And I found for me writing psychological thrillers that was the best way of bringing out those characters because it really allows me as the writer to get really behind them and really into their heads. And for me, that's the best way I can find to develop those characters, is to just really just dig into exactly who they are and how their brains work. And then I find that that really helps to kind of bring the reader along because you're seeing into their heads. Although that does then make it difficult if you are, yeah, as you said, you're not necessarily having wholly reliable narrators either, because you know it's a psychological thriller. And so yeah, there's a lot of then kind of going back through it and making sure that you're not I hate to lie to the reader, like did you know that kind of deliberate like, oh well, I know I told you this one thing, but actually. Um, so yeah, then there's a lot of kind of editing afterwards.
Well, I really enjoyed the way that you did play with that. Hey, I told you this as my buddy, right? But that natural psychological element that happens to all of us, which is sometimes I told you this in good faith, thinking that's why I was doing it at the time.
Yeah.
But really, when I think about it, it wasn't just that I was angry at my boss in that moment. It was because I'd really had a bad morning before I ever got to
Mhm.
work, that type of thing, right? So I
Yeah.
think you did a great job of creating layers to the characters and layers to their motives.
Ah, thank
So,
you.
so you're welcome. Quick question. How do you keep it all straight? You have, as I said, you're playing chess at a 3D level. How do you keep all of the lines of the spider web connected every time you drop an Easter egg, for example, that will be something that you're going to tie back to later? How do you keep track of it all?
So two things. Number one is I write really, really quickly. And so I guess because I do and I tend to kind of clear the decks and say to my husband, well, you know, you can go and fend for yourself for like 8 weeks and I will just sit and do very little other than write. So that really helps to kind of keep that total immersion in the story. But also I have a very large whiteboard um, that literally takes the entire wall of our main bedroom. And it's covered in post-it notes of every single plot line and every little nugget that's dropped through the whole thing. I'm sure my husband loves the fact that our murder wall is basically in our bedroom, but he's got over that now.
Well, first of all, I want to say that I am in awe that you have completed my personal dream of having a murder wall. I I don't know that I would necessarily that I've got at the top of the goal for it to be in my bedroom, but a murder wall sounds
It's
awesome.
the only clear wall in the house. So there's this, and I'm sure you can get it in the US as well. It's called Magic Whiteboard,
Yes.
and you stick it to the wall and it turns just a normal wall into a whiteboard, and it's sticky. The surface is really good for post-it notes, will actually stick on it and stay. And so yeah, I converted this whole massive wall and just covered it in Magic Whiteboard. And then my husband walked in and was like, what is this? And I was like, well,
So I have to say, the side of me that is a writer loves it. But on the other side, the side of me that is the reader loves it as well. Because how fun would that be when you are reading to be
mhm.
able to map it all out as the reader? Because just for me, and it was one of the reasons I wanted to ask you, how do you keep track of it all? Even as the reader, I'm trying to keep track of it all. So wouldn't that be fun if there was like a little appendix that came to it with a little, all the little lines connected and you could start filling them in as you solve the puzzle.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I should do a kind of interactive, kind of pull out at the back that you can fill it all in.
That would be awesome. Absolutely. Uh, how, obviously the underpinning issue here is murder and revenge. So, my question for you is, when you decided to take on a story about revenge, there's such a spectrum of ways that human beings seek revenge. And part of it, I find, is really linked to justice and concepts of justice, that there's a perceived slight or taking of some sort. And folks will go anywhere from a minor retribution in the moment to, as they say, revenge is a dish best served cold. How did you figure out where you wanted to be on that spectrum?
Um, so I think I always knew that it was going to be quite a kind of biblical eye for an eye type revenge. Mainly because I remember just before I started writing, I had a conversation with my editor, and she said, what do you want the Sarah Bonner brand to be? And my first novel is about a woman who kind of accidentally kills her twin sister and then tries to get away with it by living both their lives. And I'd had this idea for her sweet revenge, and I said, I think I'd like to write books about women who the reader wants to get away with murder. And she said, "Okay, yeah, that's we can work with that." And so I always knew that the revenge was going to be quite a significant revenge, um, and I don't want to give away too much of the plot, but um, so so yeah, I always knew it was going to go quite far. Which if someone kills your best friend, you're not just going to give them a slap on the wrist for it.
Exactly. And you mentioned kind of what you wanted your brand to be and thinking through that. One of the things that struck me in a very poignant way was how strong so many of the female characters are. And I wanted to just pick your brain a little bit about that and see if that was an intentional um, integration into the story, or did they just kind of speak for themselves and come to you out of the gates that strong?
I think a bit of both, to be honest. I think I'm very fortunate in my life to have to be surrounded by very, very strong women. And it was definitely something I wanted to bring into my writing. And I think it's actually something that now psychological thrillers are doing incredibly well as a genre, of actually having women with huge amounts of agency really taking control of the narrative and their lives in a way that I think maybe even so much as like 10 years ago, we didn't have that quite the same. Though, there was a lot of female victims and a lot of women who die on the first page. And so there's been a definite shift in the genre. And I think I really wanted to just lean into that and create these characters who weren't going to take that. They weren't going to take any rubbish from the men in their lives. Let's put it that way.
It was really well done, and even the character you had mentioned earlier, the mother-in-law character, an extremely strong character in her own right, and again, someone with many layers. Where do you go for your inspiration, your character inspirations in particular?
I will say that I have a very lovely mother-in-law, which I think is probably was probably really helpful with this, because it gave me a bit more of a license, I think, to play with it, because I wasn't trying to base her in necessarily someone real. But I think I've had enough friends over the years who have given me horror stories about their mothers-in-law. So she's a bit of a composite of various people. And I think as well, she was very fun and interesting to write, and she kind of exists in this plane of the kind of quite old guard British aristocracy that live in a certain part of the UK. And um, although she is a kind of extreme version of that, I have met quite a lot of these women. So she is quite grounded in a kind of sense of reality, but she isn't any one specific person.
One of the questions I had for you as well that I was thinking about as the story went on was the concept of revenge and justice, and just how closely can they be linked. Did you think about, obviously there's a huge appeal to audiences when you write about revenge. So many people want to get on board and say, hey, let's get our pitchforks and go catch the person who did this to you, right? Did you, when you were trying to decide how the outcome how it would ultimately resolve, did justice play into it? Because I noticed that oftentimes up to a certain point, if we look back at literature, movies, different types of pop culture, there was always a side where we wanted the heroes to stop, to get right to that level and stop, because then they'd still be our hero. Mm-hmm. And in recent years, we have more characters like anti-heroes, like Dexter and different characters. We want to see them go there. Yeah. What were your thoughts about that? Did you struggle with that at all, or were you very clear on that eye for an eye concept?
I was very clear about it, I think.
No struggle.
No struggle. I think just part of it is not, I don't want to write police procedurals. I don't want to have that kind of legal side of it in the same way. And I'm really fascinated by stories about people, kind of seemingly ordinary people who were thrown into very extraordinary situations, and that idea of, how far would they go? And I guess in a way it's kind of like it's holding that mirror up and saying, to the reader, what would you do in this situation? And I think I'm not going to suggest for a second that I would go murder someone, but you can kind of understand, when you peel back the layers, what might push someone into that type of situation. And so that's why, for me, certainly kind of the psychological thriller side of the genre, the crime genre, is so fascinating, because it is about that, what do ordinary people end up doing when they're put into these completely extraordinary situations. So for me, it was quite interesting, and it was quite interesting to I guess to find sufficient justification for Thea as a character, as to why she would take this very extreme action, and not just go to the police and say, I think this happened. That she very much takes matters into her own hands. So, yeah.
I applaud you. I tend to write a little on the darker side myself. So I applauded it and enjoyed it immensely, which I probably shouldn't even reveal, but I just did. So, in general, I understand from your bio, and I'm sorry, I did skip right past it. That's my apologies. I was too excited to talk to you. Your background is in the business world originally, right? Accounting, yes. I believe.
Yes.
How did those worlds bridge from accounting to writing these amazing stories?
It's funny, actually. There are quite a lot of thriller writers who are former accountants. So I wonder if there is something in that, that kind of world, of that slightly analytical world, where you're not necessarily allowed to be particularly creative. It's generally frowned upon to be too creative in finance. But I also think there is something in that that analytical focus, and that looking for reasons why things happen, and kind of questioning the world around you in that way. But I think for me, it was, I started writing to get that creativity and to find an outlet for it. And actually, coming from a finance and project management background, it's actually weirdly helpful. So I am, although I don't really plot that much, I do find once I start writing that, having spreadsheets and process maps and all of that is actually really, really helpful to keeping you on track and getting you to that end point of having a finished novel. So yeah, bizarrely, it's been a useful background in a way.
Well, I can kind of relate. I started out in finance and had a long corporate career before I had the guts, quite honestly, to put myself out there and start being creative and using the other side of my brain. So I completely respect the use of spreadsheets and milestones. I've got milestones for when things are going to be achieved,
Mm-hmm.
when Act One ends and when
Yeah.
starts, and all of that sort of thing. And it kind of begs the question: did you personally have any difficulties switching from right to left brain, or have you always kind of commingled the two?
Yeah, not really. I do tend to find so I had a couple of years of not working, predominantly during COVID. My the industry that I work in kind of uh let's just say had a big pause for COVID. So I work in airport development, and there were no flights for 2 years. So I wasn't working for a period of time, and writing full time over that period. And about 9 months 9 months ago, I went back to the office full time as well, and I've actually found that it helps me. So I find that if I use the kind of analytical side of my brain in the day, then when I come to sit down to write in the evenings, I'm actually much more productive and much more creative. And I think it's just your your brain is ticking over in the background. So when I'm sitting there, building spreadsheets, I'm still problem solving everything else. And yeah, I've actually produced a lot more, even though I've had a lot less time to write. So there's definitely something in that kind of balance, I suppose.
I did want to ask you about one last thing. I do understand from your bio that there is a rescue dog, and I am curious about this rescue dog and how he came to be in the Bonner home.
So she is Lily. She's a collie cross. We got her about 7 years ago now. So she's a rescue from a local centre to us, and we saw her on the website, and she was just so adorable. But she had the saddest face, and my husband and I just looked at her and went, "We need to go and rescue her." And so yeah, we went and said we'd like that one, please. And she has been an absolute angel. So they gave us a long list of warnings and said, she can't be around children or cats or other dogs or small animals, and you can't let her off the lead, and all of these things, and none of them have turned out to be true. And she's just brilliant. And yeah, she's not. I've had to shut her out actually, because otherwise she'll just come and jump in my lap and want to say hello. But yeah, she's very lovely, and I'm trying to persuade my husband that she really does need a brother.
Well, I am so glad that Lily was found and brought into your family. And I will also say that, just out of curiosity, was Lily warned in the whole adoption process that there'd be a murder wall in the house?
No, and also she does make a cameo in all my books as well. There's always a rescue dog called Lily in all of my books.
Fantastic. It has been absolutely a joy talking to you today, Sarah. Would you mind sharing where's the best place for readers to find you?
Well, so I up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have said Twitter. So I'm Sarah Bonner 101 on Twitter. Although I am starting to move to the less dark side of Blue Sky, where I'm Sarah Bonner. So and Instagram, Sarah Bonner 101 on there as well. So yeah, Instagram and Blue Sky, I think, are the new ones. But yeah, we shall see. It's all a bit of a shifting thing at the moment with social media. So
there is a lot going on with social media. Well, thank you again, Sarah. Do not hesitate. If you love psychological thrillers, you will love Her Sweet Revenge, and check out Sarah's first debut novel as well. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you will join us again on the next episode of Twisted Passages. Thank you.